This is the only surviving video footage of Korean comfort women captured in Yunnan Province, China in September 1944. Comfort women is an Orwellian term created by the Japanese army to hide the appalling and inhumane treatment of Korean women during World War II. Young women and underage girls had to service approximately 40 Japanese soldiers per day to meet their monstrous quota. Comfort women were treated like animals for 5 years, with only a few surviving the sadistic comfort stations. As Japan and South Korea attempted to hide this severely unsettling issue, things changed in the 1990s. Survivors began opening up about the atrocities they experienced in the comfort stations. At the same time, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe disavowed the claims, asserting that it was an effort to tarnish Japan's reputation. Welcome to Uncharted History. Join us as we take a look inside the atrocious treatment of helpless Korean comfort women coerced into sexual slavery by the Japanese army. The term comfort women hides the warped, horrifying, and sadistic history of Korean women under the Japanese military regime. Comfort women, or ianfu in Japanese, refers to 200,000 young women who were abducted during World War II for sexual exploitation in comfort stations. The military started with a single goal: to establish military brothels across the country to offer Japanese soldiers a form of sexual relief. They hoped it would reduce wartime sexual exploitation and the spread of venereal diseases. The seed for these quote-unquote stations sprouted during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905. Back then, military-controlled prostitution became popular. During the war, the brothels in Manchuria were closely regulated and secured by the Japanese military. The theory worked at first. In 1930, the government under the Minsei Party wanted to revert to the gold standard, just like before the war. They adopted ruthless deflationary policies to achieve this, but something unexpected happened. The U.S. stock market collapsed. Shockwaves swept across the world. As military powers were recovering from the effects of the Great War, Japan's brittle economy was unfit to survive both. The Showa Depression set in. Severe famine ravaged the rural communities of Japan. Malnourished children were common. Families sold their kids. Farmers sold their daughters to brothels as prostitutes. By 1932, the Japanese military was building comfort stations across the country and its colonies. The high demand was accentuated by the Shanghai incident, a bloody conflict that broke out while Shanghai was under international control. Using just 5 Buddhist monks to shout anti-Chinese slogans at Chinese civilians and get brutally beaten, Japan orchestrated a revolt that took the lives of almost 14,000 Chinese, 3,000 Japanese soldiers, and 20,000 civilians. As Japan emerged victorious, the soldiers sexually abused and tortured Chinese women en masse. Fearing the Chinese population in Shanghai would revolt, Yasuji Okamura, Japan's Imperial Army General and Chief of Staff in Shanghai, remembered the military brothels in Manchuria. In response, he ordered the army to build more comfort stations in Shanghai to prevent further sexual abuse incidents in the city. Recruitment proceeded smoothly, with Japanese ladies volunteering to become comfort women. Others were sold by their fathers. The army's theory worked well on paper. In practice, things were different. Rumors about the inhumane treatment of women in these quote-unquote comfort stations began to spread. As a result, the number of volunteers decreased. After a 5-year trial run, the brothels proved to be wildly ineffective. Venereal diseases spread at an unprecedented rate, and sexual exploitation scandals became commonplace, as was evident in the Nanjing Massacre. In 1937, around 300,000 Chinese people were eradicated by the Japanese army in the Nanjing Massacre. Additionally, 20,000 females, including children, fell victim to sexual abuse. Instead of eliminating them, comfort stations became a general policy across Japan. Was the Japanese army concerned about the increased number of military sexual abuses? As Yoshiaki Yoshimi put it, Japan installed comfort stations to avoid criticism from Europe, the United States, and China. Because the public image of Japanese society and its women began to deteriorate, the government banned travel visas for prostitutes. The policy further exhausted the supply of sex workers in the late 30s. Japan had to find other means of recruitment. In 1937, the Japanese army had to resort to deception and blatant lies in its recruitment strategy. After the Shanghai incident and the Nanjing massacre, comfort houses were regarded as hellholes, where women were brutally exploited. In response, Japan turned to its colonies. Young ladies from Korea, the Philippines, Australia, China, the Netherlands were forced to serve as Japanese soldiers in established brothels. Most comfort women came from Korea, the Philippines, and Indonesia, where recruitment was simple but deceptive and evil. Here's how it worked. Middlemen would send job offers for factory workers and nurses in Japanese colonies. In colonies like Korea, Taiwan, and Manchukuo, they ran ads in local newspapers. Hoping to escape poverty, Japanese women applied to these jobs. Instead of taking them to a hospital or factory, as the ads promised, these underage girls were placed in trucks or trains and dragged off to unknown territories. After reaching the comfort stations, they became sex slaves. No one knew where they were. Their families didn't even know if they were still alive. They couldn't rebel, they couldn't escape. All they could do was serve. Underage girls who refused to go were kidnapped in the middle of the day while their parents were working in the field. Others were enticed with scholarships for higher education. Eventually, people caught on to these quote-unquote job boards and refused to go. Metropolitan Japan was the first. The colonies followed suit, but by then, it was too late. In September 1940, Japan joined World War II, and comfort stations became torture chambers known colloquially as public toilets. Even Yasuhiro Nakasone, former Prime Minister of Japan, organized a comfort station during World War II. His memoir, Commander of 3,000 Men at age 23, published in 1978, tells the story of 4 Indonesian comfort women during World War II. The story is set in 1942, when Nakasone served as a lieutenant paymaster in the Japanese Imperial Army. His task was constructing an airfield on the island of Borneo. Young Nakasone learned that controlling men in times of war is difficult. His building schedule kept falling behind due to gambling, fighting, and sexual misconduct. Young Nakasone had to figure out how to get his men to comply with orders. One day, he procured 4 Indonesian women and founded a military brothel. The women helped mitigate the mood, as Nakasone put it. His strategy worked so well that the army commended him in a naval report. These practices were soon widely adopted across Japan. Chinese women were difficult to recruit. However, the established Korean system of prostitution enabled the Japanese military to recruit an abundance of comfort women. According to one of the few surviving documents from the period, an unknown Japanese manager paid between 300 and 1,000 yen for Korean women, which would be around $40 back then. In the contract, these young women became the manager's property until they fulfilled their obligations. During the day, the women would do laundry, cook, and clean. The horrors happened at night, when they were forced to trade sexual favors to save their life. Their workday began at 9 or 10 a.m. and ended around 9 p.m. Comfort women had only one rest day per month, if that, and they were given new clothes only twice a month. All recruits were fed a diet of rice cakes and water. The virgins and younger girls were reserved for high-ranking military officials. If the proprietor labeled them used, they would be demoted and have to serve lower-ranking officers. Chong Ok-sun, a comfort woman survivor born in 1920, says she and 400 other women were serving exactly 40 soldiers each day, as it was the daily quota. Those who questioned the numbers were brutally tortured. Chong Ok-sun remembers one girl who was tied and dragged across a nail board. She bled to death as pieces of her flesh hung on the nails. After 13 years of social experiments on innocent young women from 1932 till 1945, the results were abundantly clear. After Japan's surrender, all physical evidence was destroyed. Still, the victims never forgot, and to this day, their testimonies are contested. When Kim Chang-ryul, the president of Korea Botanic Garden, erected this monument in July 2020 to honor Korean comfort women, Japan was outraged. Officials claimed that the man kneeling before the young girl was Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and considered it an unforgivable insult. The artwork never refers to Abe or any person in particular. According to Kim, it represents a person in any position who is at fault, or anyone who could be in the position to apologize. A subtle yet powerful message. Japan and Korea are still contesting the claims of the victims, saying they are simply an attempt to shine a bad light on Japanese culture. Japan claims that they handed 1,000 condoms to the soldiers in July 1943, failing to realize that the women couldn't object to the soldiers refusing to wear them. Many women died in the brothels as a result of starvation, exploitation, and filthy living conditions. Others took their own lives in an attempt to save themselves. Those who survived became barren as a result of the countless venereal diseases. Survivors say they never had intercourse after being comfort women. Others had most of their intestines removed due to infections. And to this day, some institutions try to cover up the countless similar testimonies of these brave female survivors. War brings pain and suffering. Still, we cannot even begin to comprehend the physical, emotional, and sexual traumas these 200,000 women went through while comforting Japanese soldiers. The saying, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," never rang truer. This is Uncharted History. See you on our next video.